What's up guys, it's Topsy, and here we are once again rating all the SpeedDuel starter decks. Alright, for today's video, we're going to be grading the Ultimate Predator set, and as you can see, we have some new additions to the tier list. The reason for this is that each of these starter decks we're going to be grading moving forward are going to be 2-player starter decks that each of them come with 30 cards. The interesting thing about them is that even though there are 30 cards per player in each of these collections, they have 2 different pre-built strategies with the different cards allocated to them. Because of that, we're going to have to do the whole tiering a little bit different. It'll make more sense once we start actually doing it. So, as usual, we're going to be grading based on a few criteria. First, of course, the 20 card deck you're expected to play with their adjacent skill. We're going to be looking at the deck's consistency, power output level, and overall the quality of the cards within each of these decks. So, with all that being said, let's get started. Okay, so starting off today's video, we have the Ultimate Predator set, as I said, and we are starting off with Rex and Weevil. Their strategies are interesting. They're actually not half bad, like any of them. They're all at least somewhat decent, so this is going to be interesting to grade. Okay, so let's begin with Rex first. So as I'm sure you expected, Rex Raptor has a crap ton of dinosaurs, with the addition of the Serpent Knight Dragon, which was one of his ace monsters during like the Duelist Kingdom arc. Really cool card. So as I said, it has a ton of different dinosaur monsters like Two-Headed King Rex, Urabi, Crawling Dragon. These cards are great just because, as I mentioned in my older videos, 1600 is kind of like the threshold for a good attack stat, and 1500 isn't the worst either. After that, we have some really crappy smaller dinos, which we don't really care too much about. Moving down some more, we see some bigger dinosaur effect monsters like Black Tyranno, Super Ancient Dino Beast. We have Dark Triceratops, and yeah, that's all the tributes. These aren't half bad. In particular, Dark Triceratops and Super Ancient Dino Beast are pretty good in particular, just because they are single tribute monsters. Super Ancient Dino Beast, even though it is a level 8, if you do control a dinosaur, you can just tribute it with 1 less tribute, so that's pretty neat. Black Tyranno is pretty interesting, but more situational. Moving down some more to the other effect monsters, we have cards like Mad Sword Beast, Gillosaurus, Gill Lizard, and Hyper Hammerhead. All 4 of these cards are really good. Mad Sword Beast just because it adds the pressure of piercing damage, Gillosaurus gives you a free body on the field, Gill Lizard gives you a nice bounce, and Hyper Hammerhead can pretty much out any monster in the game. So that's not half bad whatsoever. Cards like Elementsaurus, Black Stego, and Gentle Mandor are a lot more situational. The shame is that Elementsaurus doesn't get its bonus effect of the attack gain just because you don't have any fire dinos, so that kind of sucks. And the earth effect, it's only okay. Black Stego is just a 2k defender, nothing special, and Gentle Mandor is a pretty neat card that I actually ended up getting a lot of respect for the more I played with it, so it's kind of cool. So overall, the monster lineup is not half bad. Moving down to the spell cards, we have some interesting choices. Raise Body Heat is a whatever card, just being a very generic equip spell. Ultra Evolution Pill is a very bad card. I much prefer Space Time Transcendence, it's significantly better. Cost Down I'm not a huge fan of, just because it requires way too much for just leveling down a monster, in my opinion at least. Summoner's Art is pretty cool to search out the Serpent Knight Dragon. That's going to be very relevant when it comes to one of the actual skills. White Elephant's Gifts is huge just because you have a good amount of vanilla, so you want to tribute off to get a nice draw too. Heat Wave is enormous. This is the most expensive card out of this whole starter deck, which is crazy. Great card. Especially with a vanilla aggro strategy you can play with, and Card Advance is kind of a whatever card. Not impressed by it, honestly. Moving on to the trap cards. In particular, I'm not a huge fan of them. Hunting Insect is pretty cool, but it requires your opponent to special summon, which isn't hyper common. Reinforcements is pretty nice just because this is a beatdown strategy as a whole. Pharaoh's Treasure is a really underwhelming card. It's not good. And Limit Impulse, while it's very cost heavy, at the bare minimum you can just activate during your opponent's like end phase to get 2 tokens on the field to tribute out one of your bigger monsters. So I guess it has that versatility, but I'm not a huge fan of it. So yeah, overall the deck as a whole, the 30 card deck, not bad. Like, we've seen significantly worse. Now let's go ahead and take a quick look at each of the individual decks for Rex. As I mentioned, Rex has 2 separate decks, the Dinosaur Kingdom deck and the Nightmare Sonic Blast deck. So both of these strategies focus on something significantly different. The Dinosaur Kingdom strategy relies significantly on just normal summon Dino and beat down. while the Nightmare Sonic Blast deck tries to prioritize making Serpent Knight Dragon and kind of control the game with that card. So let's break down each of these. Alright, so beginning with the Dinosaur Kingdom deck. As we can see, we have a good amount of vanilla monsters with the two-handed King Rex, the Crawling Dragon, the Urabis, and the two little dinos. This lineup of monsters isn't half bad. The underlying issues is mainly these two cards in particular. They're just not good at all. As for the effect monsters, Black Stego is not half bad. Elementosaurus is pretty okay. Super Ancient Dino Beast is a really good addition. Black Tyranno, Triceratops is great, and Gale Lizard, not bad. So overall, the monster lineup, not too bad. Moving on to the spell cards, we have the Wild Elephant's Gift. I already mentioned how I like this. Raise Body Heat, I guess. It doesn't hurt. Ultra Evolution Pill is just bad. Space Resistance, it's just better Ultra Evolution Pill. Heat Wave and Card Advance. Heat Wave is great. Card Advance it's okay. Hunting Instinct and Reinforcements pretty much wraps up the trap lineup. So overall, this deck isn't half bad. It's doing beatdown very effectively. Let's go ahead and take a quick look at the skill now to see if it ties the deck together or it hinders it. So the skill for this deck is Dinosaur Kingdom, and it's super basic. All it does is all dinosaur monsters gain 300 attack and defense. This is a field spell skill, and honestly, it does everything the deck needs it to. Giving all your dinos a 300 attack and defense boost is huge, especially when you take in consideration that the deck runs 2 copies of Urabi, so that's just an 1800 attack monster that you have access to very easily. And then with cards like the Crawling Dragon and the King Rex just being 1900 attack monsters, that's really good, alongside all the other cards that you get access to. Then if we take into consideration cards like the reinforcements, this pretty much just shows you how aggressive this deck is. The heat wave preventing your opponent from like an entire turn just summoning any monsters. You can pretty much take games fairly easily with this deck. So honestly, really good. The one change I would have loved to have seen is like the addition of a card like Hyper Hammerhead into this deck, or the Mad Sword Beast. Honestly, if you were to substitute these two guys with those cards, this would be so much better. But you know what? For what we have, not bad. Now, as for the Nightmare Sonic Blast deck, let's take a look at it. So as you can see, they pretty much took every good vanilla dino they had access to and pretty much gave them to you without the addition of the little baby ones. So that's a good start. Moving down to the effect monsters, we have the Super Ancient Dino Beast, okay, Gillosaurus, great, Mad Sword Beast, pretty good, Black Stego, pretty nice, Gale Lizard, Gentlemander, Dark Triceratops, and Hyper Hammerhead. Honestly, the monster lineup, pretty solid. Onto the spell cards. White Elephant's Gift, Cost Down, Card Advance, and Summoner's Art. Not bad, honestly. The card advance and the cost downs are a bit questionable, but it makes sense, honestly. It's okay. Onto the trap cards, Limit Impulse, and Pharaoh's Treasure. Pharaoh's Treasure does nothing for the deck, in my opinion. Limit Impulse, as I mentioned, very cost heavy, but it makes sense. The deck overall is just trying to summon Serpent Knight Dragon, which is going to explain the whole skill behind it. So the skill this deck has access to is Nightmare Sonic Blast, and it reads: activate this skill while the only monster you control is Serpent Knight Dragon. Once per turn, you can reveal the top 4 cards of the deck and do one of the following, based on the number of monsters revealed. 1. Add one of the revealed monsters to your hand. 2. Destroy one face-up card your opponent controls. Or 3. Do both of the above effects in sequence. So honestly, overall, this effect is very, very good. And also to take into consideration, this is the errata version of the original skill. The original skill, if I'm not wrong, had the caveat that Serpent Knight Dragon didn't have to be the only monster you controlled, and also I don't believe it had the summoning restriction as well. And honestly, it makes sense because this skill back in its day was one of the craziest skills in the game and made this strategy a very imposing deck to go up against. So it makes sense. Overall, the skill is great in my opinion. I think even in its nerfed version in this type of environment, it's still really, really good if you can establish the Serpent Knight Dragon. However, the main issue this deck has is that summoning that Serpent Knight Dragon is actually very, very difficult. You do have cards like the cost down and the limit impulse that kind of try to make it easier to summon. However, it's still pretty difficult. So that's probably going to knock it down a couple points. Now let's actually get to tiering them. So if I were to grade the Dinosaur Kingdom deck, honestly, I think this is a very solid A tier strategy. The deck is not complicated in the slightest. It is just as simple as it gets. Summon Dino, attack opponent, win game. It's very, very simple, and honestly, it's effective at what it's trying to do. It doesn't try to complicate anything. As for the Serpent Knight Dragon deck, in my opinion, the deck gets very much hindered by the fact that summoning Serpent Knight Dragon is extremely difficult. As I said, while you do get access to cards like the Limit Impulse or the cost down, this still doesn't mitigate the fact that getting a 2 tribute monster on the field is still very difficult, and at that it doesn't have any protection to keep it on the field. But if you do manage to keep it on the field, the power output is insane. Because of that, I feel like it's probably going to be one of the higher C tier strategies, just because if you can enable the strategy, extremely powerful, but I don't think you're going to be doing it that consistently, so C tier. I'm curious to see if you guys agree with me or not, but I think that's where I have to put it, unfortunately. I really like this deck, so it kind of sucks to put it there. Alright then, up next we have Weevil himself, and in my personal opinion, I think Weevil probably has the weaker decks overall, but let's see if I change my mind on this. Of course, as we expect from our buggy friend, he has nothing but insect monsters. Perfectly Ultimate Great Moth is one of the cards that kind of sticks out, especially when you take into consideration how difficult it is of a card to summon. However, this does get mitigated because of one of Weevil's skills, so we won't dock it too many points because of that. Moving down, however, we can see something very glaring, that being the amount of vanilla monsters we have access to. From Petite Moth all the way to Alien Insection. All these cards are atrocious. These are some of the weakest monsters you'll see, and they make up a majority of the deck. Like, it's actually kind of wild how many of them there are. But once we ignore all the very, very underwhelming vanilla insects, we can now see some pretty decent cards. Starting off with Insect Queen, which isn't half bad of a boss monster, Cocoon of Evolution just being a nice little 2k defender, Man-Eater Bug just genuinely being very nice for removal, Pinch Hopper and Gokipon being two exceptional cards because of their ability to either special summon cards from your hand or be able to search out cards that enable it. So that's honestly great. Oh, and you know what? Let's throw in B-Tron as well while we're at it. These three cards in particular are very much standouts in this deck. Insect Princess is a phenomenal boss monster, or pseudo boss monster, I guess. Honestly, in my opinion, I prefer her over the Insect Queen or the Perfectly Great Moth, but that's just me personally. And B-List Soldier is interesting just because you do get the chance to draw 2 cards, but it is a bit, in my opinion, difficult to pull off. It's not the hardest, but you know what? If you can make it work, it's great. So besides the vanillas, the monster lineup is pretty decent. Moving down to the spell cards, they're not half bad. The Laser Cannon Armor, again, very generic equip spell. Forest, very underwhelming. Verdant Sanctuary, Insect Neglect. Wormbait, Enchanting Fitting Room, and Dark Factory of Mass Production. All these cards are great. Verdant Sanctuary being a phenomenal piece of support for insect decks. Insect Neglect being a way to protect yourself from your opponent, like destroying you. Wormbait being honestly just good in general, just because if you happen to control a insect already on the field, it allows you to get 2 tokens out, and it just kind of gives you free tribute fodder to bring out cards like Insect Queen or the Insect Princess. So you know what, not half bad. Enchanting Fitting Room is actually really good just because of the ability to special summon vanillas, and as we can see, there is quite a few of them, and same idea with the Dark Factory, being able to recover them from the graveyard. So these are more situationally good, but in this deck they make sense, and you know what, I appreciate seeing them here. Amulet of Ambition and Eradicating Aerosol. Eradicating Aerosol is an interesting card just because you would think this is really bad in this deck in particular, but one of the skills actually makes this card very, very powerful. As for the Amulet of Ambition, it's a pretty interesting equip spell, allowing your weaker monsters to be able to topple some of your opponent's stronger monsters, so you know what, I don't mind it at all. Onto the trap cards now. Spider Eggs is pretty cool, just giving you more tribute fodder. Corrosive Scales is an interesting trap card. Adhesive Trap Hole is very nice because your monsters aren't that strong, so being able to reduce the attack of your opponent's monsters is pretty helpful. And finally, Order to Smash. If you're going to have that many vanillas in your deck, you might as well make good use of them by being able to destroy 2 back row of your opponent. So you know what? Great addition. Alright then. So, the deck is not half bad, as we can see. There's some really good interesting stuff in them, but how does it stack up when built up? Well, let's begin with the Hyper Metamorphosis deck. So what this deck is trying to accomplish in general is just bring out Perfectly Ultimate Great Moth as fast as humanly possible. So in the main deck, we can see a good amount of the smaller vanilla insect monsters alongside the Perfectly Ultimate Great Moth, the Insect Queen as your big boss monsters of the deck. We also have Man-Eater Bug, Meatless Soldier, Goki Pons, and Cocoon of Evolution. The monster lineup as a whole isn't great. Man-Eater Bug is phenomenal, and Gokipon is good. However, you're not searching out anything all that worthwhile in this deck with the Gokipon, so it's like a bit questionable. Moving on to the spell cards now, we have the Enchanting Fitting Room, makes sense. White Elephant's Gift, same thing. Verdant Sanctuary, Amulet of Ambition, and Dark Factory of Mass Production. Honestly, I don't have a problem with any of the spell cards in this section. They're all very much worthwhile with the deck you're trying to play. And finally, for the trap cards, we have the Spider Eggs, the Corrosive Scales, and Order to Smash. And again, no real issues with the trap cards either. They're all pretty much, they all make sense why they're here. But how well does this skill tie the deck together? Well, the skill for this deck is Hyper Metamorphosis, and it reads, you can activate this skill while you control a level 3 or lower insect monster. Discard 2 cards and tribute 1 level 3 or lower insect monster you control to special summon 1 Perfectly Great Moth from your hand or deck, ignoring its summoning conditions. Any damage your opponent takes for the rest of this turn is halved. So, as far as skills go, this is a powerful effect. However, the cost to be able to do this is so heavy because you are pretty much getting rid of a total of 3 cards in order to facilitate this, and you're putting it all on the Perfectly Ultimate Great Moth to hope to carry you to victory. And that's one of my biggest issues with this strategy as a whole. Will you summon Perfectly Great Moth consistently? Yes, you will. You will summon it surprisingly consistently. And will you win games? Of course. Perfectly Great Moth is very, very powerful at 3500 attack stat. However, if your opponent has any type of monster removal, you just lose. Your deck is not able to survive after the summon of Perfectly Great Moth, so it is very, very top heavy. Alright then, so how about the Hidden Parasite deck? How does this one hold up compared to the other? Well, as you can see, we still are playing a couple vanilla monsters, which, as I said, aren't all that impressive, and especially in this deck as well. But as for the effect monsters, we are playing cards like Insect Queen, Insect Princess, which are pretty good on their own regards, Man-Eater Bug, Pinch Hopper, Goki Pons, Beatron, and Beatless Soldier. And so pretty much we're playing every good effect monster in the deck. As for the spell cards, we're playing cards like Worm Bait, Verdant Sanctuary, Insect Neglect, Laser Cannon Armor, Forest, and Eradicating Aerosol. And for the trap cards, we have the Spider Eggs, the Corrosive Scales, and the Adhesive Trap Hole. Honestly, no issue with the trap card lineup whatsoever. Now, what about the skill? What does this skill try to do, and how does it tie the whole deck together? Let's check it out. Hidden Parasite is a skill for this deck, and it reads, once per turn, you can change all monsters on the field to Insect until the end of this turn. Also, any battle damage your opponent takes is halved until the end of this turn. You may use this skill up to twice per duel. So this skill is very interesting because having the ability to, on a whim, change the typing of every monster on the field can be extremely powerful, especially when paired up with Eradicating Aerosol. In addition, being able to change every monster on the field to an insect, it can be proved to be very beneficial whenever you control your Insect Queen, because you're significantly stronger. As far as skills go, this isn't the craziest skill. In particular, this deck mostly gets carried because of the quality of monsters within the deck in particular. Alright, now to see how well these decks match up against the others. Well, starting off with the Perfectly Great Moth deck. As I said, this deck has a very high floor because of the ability to just summon that Perfectly Great Moth very, very easily. However, that does get countered by any type of monster removal in the game. Perfectly Great Moth has 0 protection, and the second you lose him, you lose the duel. There is no coming back from that. So because of that, I don't think it can go in A tier. It has like A tier power, but because of that, I believe it's probably going to be like a higher B tier strategy, just because of how powerful it is. And if your opponent can't reach their monster destruction, they can just lose the duel pretty quickly. Now, how about the hidden parasite strategy? Well, this one's a bit harder to grade, just because the overall deck isn't half bad. However, there are some cards that are pretty questionable and not that great. In my opinion, it's probably still somewhere in B tier. I'd probably say it's like behind the Dark Magician deck. It's not bad, but it could have been better. Alright, and with that, this concludes the Ultimate Predator set. Pretty interesting set as a whole. Surprisingly enough, these decks who graded it way higher than I originally expected. So that was very nice to see. In the comment section below, let me know whether you agree or disagree with any of my choices, if you remove any of these decks higher or lower on the tier list. As usual guys, if you did end up enjoying today's video, then a like would be very much appreciated and a subscribe as well. Do stay tuned because I do plan on releasing the last few episodes of the series fairly soon, so they should be out within a couple of days. As always, have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll catch you on the next one. Bye.